The late afternoon sun was dipping low as I pulled into my driveway after a long day, the quiet of Oakwood Heights shattered by the sight of a police cruiser parked by the community pond. My stomach sank. In our neighborhood, police visits usually meant one thing. Karen Payton, our HOA president, had found another target for her relentless power trips. Jogging toward the pond, I heard her shrill voice slicing through the serene air. There, on his favorite bench, sat Walter Garrison, a 78-year-old grandfather who'd lived here longer than anyone. His weathered hands gripped his fishing rod, steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Karen stood behind a young officer, arms crossed, her crisp blazer and HOA president badge gleaming like a sheriff's star. Her blonde bob bounced with indignation as she gestured at Walter. But what unfolded next would cost the HOA control over a $2 million waterfront easement. Walter had moved to Oakwood Heights in 1992, when the area was mostly farmland and the pond was a beloved fishing spot for locals. His modest ranch house sat on 3 acres, the pond marking his property's eastern boundary. For over 30 years, Walter walked to that pond each morning, tackle box in hand, finding peace in a few quiet hours of fishing. Karen arrived 2 years ago, buying the McMansion on Hillcrest Drive. Within 6 months, she'd clawed her way onto the HOA board. Within a year, she was president. From day one, she aimed to transform Oakwood Heights into her vision of a premier residential community. First came mailbox regulations, then an approved paint color list, beige and gray only. Landscaping rules followed, demanding country club perfect yards. Her latest obsession was the pond, which she declared an HOA-exclusive amenity, requiring $50 monthly access permits. That morning, Walter had strolled to the pond at 7 a.m., coffee in one hand, tackle box in the other. He'd been fishing for an hour when Karen marched down the gravel path in her power suit, despite it being Saturday. In her most authoritative tone, she announced that pond access now required HOA approval and a permit fee. Walter smiled and kept fishing. Karen lost it. My neighbor Janet, walking her dog nearby, overheard the confrontation. Karen stood behind Walter, reading HOA bylaws in a hostile tone. When he didn't respond, she threatened to have him trespassed. When he still didn't move, she dialed 911. By the time I reached the pond, half the neighborhood had gathered, fed up with Karen's tyranny. We formed a semicircle, phones recording. The officer, fresh-faced and uneasy, tried to mediate, asking Walter if he lived nearby. Walter nodded, pointing to his house through the trees. Turning to Karen, the officer asked for her side. She launched into a rehearsed speech about HOA regulations, waving a manila folder she claimed held proof the HOA owned the pond and surrounding land, valued at $2 million. Her confidence grew with each word. The officer examined her papers, brow furrowing, then asked Walter for documentation. Walter reached into his tackle box, pulling out a weathered envelope containing his 1992 deed. That's when things turned. The officer studied the deed and made a call to the county records office. We waited in tense silence as Karen tapped her foot, shooting smug glances at the crowd, as if daring us to challenge her. 3 minutes later, the officer hung up, clearing his throat. His words hit like a thunderbolt. County records showed the pond and a 50-foot easement around it had never been transferred to the HOA due to a clerical error during the community's incorporation. It remained under a public trust with access rights tied to Walter's deed. Not only was Walter allowed to fish, but he might be the only resident with formal access rights. The HOA had been enforcing rules on land it didn't control. Karen's face cycled from triumph to confusion to horror. She sputtered, demanding the officer's supervisor, but the damage was done. The crowd buzzed, phones out, pulling up the HOA website to check pond-related fees and fines collected over the years. Someone shouted about refunding permit fees. Another questioned the HOA's authority to issue fines. The questions piled up, and Karen had no answers. Within an hour, 2 county officials arrived to review the situation. Patricia Holloway, a no-nonsense county officer, confirmed the error. The HOA's claim to the pond was invalid. This mistake jeopardized property values and development rights. Patricia issued a cease and desist order, halting all HOA pond enforcement and ordering refunds of collected fees. She announced a full audit of the HOA's property claims. Karen's humiliation peaked when Patricia demanded a public apology. Standing by the pond, Walter still fishing calmly, Karen muttered that all access restrictions were lifted. The crowd's reaction mixed shock and satisfaction. Some applauded, others asked to join Walter fishing. The oppressive air Karen had cultivated began to lift. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting saw 3 board members resign, distancing themselves from Karen's reckless leadership. The remaining members hired an attorney to assess liability. The legal findings were brutal. The HOA owed thousands in refunds, and losing the pond slashed the community's asset value by over $2 million. The HOA's insurance company launched an investigation into Karen's negligence. Walter had tried to warn Karen months earlier. After her first board meeting, he'd approached her with his deed, explaining the easement and offering to show county records. She dismissed him, waving a manicured hand, saying old-timers needed to accept change. The truth? Walter's family owned the farm Oakwood Heights was built on. In the 1980s, his father negotiated the pond's public access, with their family retaining permanent fishing rights, all filed with the county, never transferred to the HOA. The local news pounced. HOA president calls cops on elderly veteran, loses $2 million asset. Walter, a Vietnam veteran, became a local hero, a detail Karen would have known if she'd ever listened. The insurance investigation uncovered more. Karen had sent cease and desist letters to residents, threatening baseless legal action, and collected $15,000 in pond permit fees, now refundable with interest. She'd convinced the board to take a loan for pond improvements, using the unowned property as collateral. The state attorney general's office stepped in after resident complaints, finding Karen had listed the pond as an HOA asset on loan applications and marketing materials, potentially committing fraud. Her real estate license faced review. At a packed special community meeting, residents unleashed years of frustration. The board treasurer revealed the financial hit: $2 million in lost assets, plus $800,000 in potential legal liabilities. Karen's defense: she'd acted in good faith based on old documentation, crumbled as residents listed her abuses. Fining a widow $500 for a wrong beige mailbox, threatening a disabled veteran over his wheelchair ramp. The vote to remove Karen passed 212-3. A second vote to pursue legal action against her for negligence and misrepresentation passed 198-17. The board's attorney announced Karen could face civil penalties of $300,000, plus possible state fraud charges carrying up to $50,000 in fines and 5 years in prison. Karen stood frozen at the podium, mouth gaping, then grabbed her papers and fled, her heels clicking frantically on the linoleum as she ran sobbing to her Mercedes. A year later, I stood by the pond, now a public fishing spot again. Walter was there, rod in hand, teaching a neighbor's kid to cast. The HOA was a shadow of itself, its assets liquidated to cover refunds and legal st. Karen faced jail time, her real estate career in tatters. I'd started a community group, Free Pond Alliance, to help others fight HOA overreach. At a neighborhood barbecue, we raised our glasses to Walter and to freedom. The pond sparkled under the sun, and Oakwood Heights felt like a community again. Not Karen's fiefdom, but a place where neighbors shared more than rules.